Okay, well, hey, Jon Sanders, everybody. John, great to have you on the Pastors Leadership Network podcast.
Les, thank you so much, man. It's an honor to get to hang out and visit with you for a little bit today. Thank you.
Well, the more I hear about your heart and the more I hear about your story, man, the more I know that you're a kindred spirit. I love your kingdom mindset. I love the fact that you reach out to a lot of different kinds of people. So your world, John, the people will know when they hear a little bit more of your story, is not confined to the walls of a church building, and that I just absolutely love that. So there's a lot of marketplace. There's a lot of your heart is the heart of a servant, and that's even backed up by your other profession. So I'd like for you to talk about that some, and being a first responder as well. So if you would just tell us a little bit about your story and who you are, okay?
Yeah, well, thanks, man. I had kind of a normal pastor's kids upbringing, if there's such a thing. I grew up in ministry. My dad was a pastor, and I enjoyed that. I really did. Like I loved the church, but I knew that is not what I was going to do with my life. Like I even told God that much, and just like, God, I love you. I just don't ask me to be a pastor. That looks hard, and it's just not my thing. So
Yeah.
when I was in high school, I really got caught up with the dream of being a firefighter. Some kids outgrow that dream, and I never did. I thought it'd be cool to be a firefighter, and so I went
Did
down
you have
that
the
road.
red, you had the red truck and the hat and the badge and all that probably?
Yeah, like truth is, we don't have time to get into this. I really thought I wanted to be a cop growing up, but then in high school, I realized there's a much better team to play for. So I went to the firefighting side of things. So
Okay.
that's just my little
Uh,
jab at my brothers in blue there. But no, I went into the fire service at the age of 21. I got hired on as a firefighter for the city of Peoria and thought I would do that for the next 30 years and retire and figure that out then. And the way I tell the story is that God just messed up my plans, Les. He
mhm.
he continued to pursue me. And I like my posture wasn't one of like rebellion toward God. It's like, Lord, I love you. I love the church. I'm willing to serve in it. Just don't ask me to lead it. Like, and he did. He kept pursuing me and I knew it. And so finally I surrendered and said, God, I think you're making a big mistake. If you want me as a pastor. But if you insist, I will. I'll surrender. And essentially, what God got through to me as I'm giving up all my excuses of I'm not old enough, I'm not educated enough, experienced enough, all these things. God basically just got through to me with this message. Are you willing enough? Because I don't need you to bring anything to the table, John, other than a submitted heart. And I can show the world what I can do through a submitted life, and it's not about what you bring, it's about who I am and what I offer.
Mm.
So, okay, God, I'll follow you. And I made it really what felt like a huge decision to leave the fire service and transition into church planting pastoral ministry. My wife and I moved out to rural South Dakota and planted a church that we ended up leading for the last 16 years. Um, and that was an incredible run. God really in that season showed me the need for healthy churches, especially in rural small towns. And that church grew into multiple sites, and God just did some really cool things. Somewhere along that journey, Les, I launched a podcast for rural pastors called the Small Town Big Church Podcast. And basically the big idea is that we serve a God who wants to do big things in small places. Sometimes pastors that are serving in a small town battle with feelings of somehow being less than or inferior to
Mhm.
the pastors that made it in the big leagues. Somehow I'm in the
Right.
minor leagues, and we view our small place as a small calling. And so I created a
Mm.
podcast that really championed those leaders in that space, saying, what if God actually wanted to do something eternally significant and big in your small town and in your surrounding region? And what if he was looking for some leaders that were willing to believe him for those big things instead of seeing this as a penalty box to escape? What if this was where God wanted to do something very significant in your life and through your leadership? And so I created that podcast back in 2014. And man, God has just blessed that over the years. It's opened the doors for some incredible opportunities of influence where I've gotten to speak into the lives of pastors all around the nation, even other parts of the world, and really just build a great network of pastors. I'm connected to some amazing leaders in the church, and leaders who you'll never know their name because they're in small places, obscure places, but they're
Mhm.
doing amazing things. And I've gotten to know them and learn with them and from them. And so where I'm at now, a few years ago, well, 6 years ago now, I had a really wild opportunity to go back into full-time firefighting for the city of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So for about 5 years, I was working as a full-time firefighter and a full-time pastor of this church. And eventually, here about a year and a half ago, back in 2020, I saw a pathway opening up into what I call a new season of ministry, where I really felt like God was saying, your time here in this position as a lead pastor is coming to a close, and I've got a new season of ministry. So now, in addition to being a full-time firefighter, I launched a business where I am podcasting, I'm coaching pastors, and just creating content and really working with many churches now, rather than just leading one. I'm serving a lot of churches by serving the leaders that lead them. So that's kind of a 30,000-foot biography of my vocational story up to this point.
Man, there's just so many different places to dive in there. But one of the things I'd like to ask you about is the whole the small town big church. Um, Brand is not the right word to use here, but just that whole mindset that you have in the whole community, really, I guess, the tribe that you've been getting to know during that season. And the reason is, John, most of our listeners are going to be pastors of what are considered smaller churches, because
Yeah.
most churches are what most people would be considered smaller churches, which is ironic. They're really the normal sized church, and
Right.
it's the outliers are actually the mega churches and the multi-site mega churches. And God can use all of those. Like, he's
Yep.
not limited by that. But I would like for you to speak into just a little bit about what happened there in your neck of the woods, because it I think you deliberately wanted that as the church got larger, you wanted it to get smaller at the same time, it sounds like. That is, in terms of the sense of community and still ministering to one another and ministering in the community. From the sounds of things, even when you all went more with some kind of a multi-site model, it sounds like you deliberately did not want people to slip through the cracks or be able to come in and hide somewhere. So can you
Yeah.
about that?
Well, our journey into multi-site was interesting. After we'd been here for 5 years, and God did in 5 years what I thought was going to take a lifetime to accomplish, in terms of having a church established that was supporting my salary full time. And we even moved into a building, not one we built, but we purchased a building. And man, I thought it was going to take years and years to do all that. And God did it very quickly. And so I entered into a season of prayer and even fasting, just asking God to show me what's next. What does the next chapter look like? Where do we go from here? And it was out of that season of prayer and fasting where I really sensed God saying, through the use of technology, we are going to multiply this church into other rural communities. In that first 5 years, God had shown me why he called me to a rural community, because I resisted it. I came to a town of 2,300 people, looked around, saw 10 other churches, steeples and stained glass everywhere. And I'm like, God, why do we need another church here? And other people would ask me that question, why another church? And I'm like, ask God. It wasn't my idea. And what God really exposed me to was the number of times I would have someone come up after a church service and say, John, I've sat in church my entire life in this community, and I've never heard that message. The message, all it was the gospel, this idea that you need a personal faith relationship with Jesus Christ. That was a novel message to religious people in a rural community. So God had started to show me, this isn't just your small town, John. This is rural America. There is
Mhm.
almost a demonic spirit of religion that plagues so much of our rural towns. They look religious from the outside. There's a form of godliness, but people don't know Jesus. They've been given just enough gospel to be inoculated from it and not really have the true thing. So as I started to pray, God, what's next? He showed me, we're going to multiply this. And he gave me a vision for multiple rural towns. So this was in the summer of 2009. Les, and I had not even heard the term multi-site. Like some
Right.
pastors maybe have led their church into multi-site because it
Not
sounds trendy
many.
or
It's very
sexy or
early. Yeah.
yeah. And so I didn't even know it was a thing. I certainly didn't know it was possible to be done in a rural context. So there wasn't like this big strategy behind us moving multi-site other than the fact that we were starting to see people driving from farther away communities, and we thought rather than trying to build a large church here in this one community and
Mhm.
ask people to drive 60 minutes or more to come, let's go to them. Let's take the
Yeah.
church and put a gospel preaching, life giving church in their community. So we had a huge vision to just see this happen again and again. And it's kind of interesting, Les, because now that was something I really wrestled with as I was coming to the end of my season of lead pastor. I was like, God, I thought you told me we were going to do all of, reach all these communities. And what he helped me see is we're still doing that. It's just not the way you thought, John. You thought it was going to be all under the brand or the name of your church.
Mhm.
I'm going to use you to impact church leaders in many, many multiple rural communities. So I had to kind of work through that. It's not quite as big of a brand, if you will, as if it was my church in all these locations with my face on a screen. It's a more obscure role. I'm behind the scenes working with the leaders of these churches. So you're giving me way more credit by making it sound like we had this big plan. We had no idea what we were doing other than to
Mhm.
be obedient to that vision of reaching these rural communities, and we
Yeah.
muddled our way through it, and God made something of our mess.
Well, John the Baptist didn't do too badly staying in the background, so you're in good company there, bro.
Yeah, well, it's a constant
Different
struggle
John.
because there's part of me that would love to come out and be on the front of it, but
Yeah.
yeah, the behind this is a fun season of ministry though. After 16 years of being in a lead pastor role, there is something really cool about having a ministry that's more of a business and just has me behind the scenes having powerful conversations with pastors. I'm having more fun than I thought I would in this, Les. Like there's some pressure that I don't deal with every week that I'm sure you can relate to. It's like Sunday rolls around relentlessly every seven
It's quick,
days. And
man. It's
now
quick.
I don't have all that on my shoulders. So
Yes, it is quick. Well, there's 2 things. I wanna come back to that in just a second, the part about, transitioning out and, the space that you're in now, because I think a lot we're gonna have what some people would consider an uncomfortable conversation.
yes, let's
It
do it.
it's not to me and you, we've had it before, but I do want, before we leave it, there are so many guys that I think live in discouragement because of the perception of maybe what the resources that are accessible through a larger ministry or a larger platform or a more visible um, ministry.
Mhm,
But there are some really unique and great advantages of being in those some of those smaller settings, smaller by population or by geography. And so, whereas a lot of pastors, it's tempting to think what we don't have, or to think of a reason why something is not possible. You and I are in a community where, when there seem to be limitations, we're trained to ask, "What does this make possible?"
mhm.
So, just talk about what that smaller size, relatively speaking, um, what that makes possible, and the advantages of being in a community like that.
Oh, there's tremendous advantages to doing ministry in a small community. For one, it's possible to have a larger impact on a percentage basis. I don't know exactly how you'd measure that, but where if you're in a city of 2 million people, it you're going to have to do some massive things to have a citywide impact as a local church. But in a city of 2,300 people, you don't have to do nearly as much to have a large effect on that community. So there's opportunity for big ministry in small towns. And it doesn't have to look like, I think one of the mistakes we make as small church leaders is we look at our brothers and sisters at the big level. And I'm
Yeah.
not an anti mega church guy. I think God uses all kinds of churches to
Mhm.
reach people for his kingdom. So, but we look at our brothers and sisters doing it at that big level, and we try to imitate them
Mhm.
instead of looking at our small church and our small setting and saying, what does this make possible? What advantages do we have that we can do really well? What's just one or two things that our church can become known for, instead of feeling like we have to try and do 80 things that we see, the church in Chicago or Miami doing, or whatever the case may be. So in a small community, certainly there's a relational aspect that we don't see quite as readily available in a large urban context or suburban context. So there's like, you can leverage that to your advantage in ministry, that just that small town atmosphere. There's certainly challenges that come with that too, a rural
Right.
mindset and mentality that people bring into the church with them as well.
Sure.
But yeah, there's tremendous advantages to doing ministry in a small place.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go back now and talk some about what can be an uncomfortable topic, but I think that it's one that must be had, that must be talked about. And I know you agree. And that is all of the large quantity, if you believe the statistics, and I have no reason not to, anywhere between 1,500 and 1,700 of our colleagues are leaving their places of ministry every month, not year, month. And I know many of them, and you do too. So if anything, that may be low, a low estimation.
Mm.
Some of them, in fact, many of them, have nowhere else to go, and so they take the first thing that comes along, and sometimes that has good results, and sometimes it doesn't. Some people, because I think that they probably know deep down that they're that season needs to come to a close. Some people will even and have self-sabotaged, not knowing why. But it happens, almost giving them an out in some ways. And there's some psychology involved in there and all of that I'm not an expert on. I just see it happening, and I know it happens.
Yeah.
So I, many men, many women probably stay too long, either out of a sense of guilt, like God called me to this, and I shouldn't do anything else, or out of a sense that that's the only thing that they know how to do, or they put so much in education and can't abandon that. In the same way that a physician or an attorney or a dentist, we hear about people in those professions putting hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes in where they and then they arrived at that point and thought, this isn't it. This isn't what I need to be doing. But because there's so much invested there, they choose not to leave it. So would you just talk a little bit about the things, whatever you're comfortable in sharing, the things personally that happened in your life for you to make the pivot that you did? And I know your heart is still in ministry. I mean, you're
Yeah.
equipping people that are still in ministry full time as
Yeah.
well as otherwise. So just talk about what you see, and then you may want to make mention of an endeavor that you and I have in process right now to hopefully help some of these people that don't feel like they have anywhere to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's a great conversation, and I don't think it should even be uncomfortable. I'm using my platform to shout this from the rooftops now. It did take me a while to start speaking this boldly to it, because of those feelings of guilt and, well, I don't know if I should be saying this stuff this
Yeah.
loudly, but here's what I'm saying now with just reckless abandon. I have come to a point to recognize and to take ownership of this idea that the model we call church is severely broken and it needs to be fixed. I'm not talking about our message less. I believe the church is in very capable hands. It belongs to Jesus. I believe the best days of the church are still in front of her. But this model that we currently are working in the western part of the world, and the thing that we have known and called church our entire life, is broken. And if you are wired to push back on that idea and go, John, that sounds really abrasive. Again, Les, I just point to the scoreboard. 1,500 to 1,700 pastors walking out of ministry every month, feeling like failures, feeling like it didn't work for me. Something must be wrong with me. In some cases, walking away from the faith entirely. In some cases,
Mm.
taking their life. Like,
Yeah.
this is broken. And my evidence is the fact that we have a structure that is chewing up the shepherds. and spitting them out. So something is broken there. Now, it's easy to be a guy that points to all the problems. It's quite another to say, well, let's look for solutions. And if it's true that the best days of the church are really in front of us, and I believe it is, how do we usher leaders into that new season? How do we help leaders lead into that new season of ministry where we're getting back to what the church is supposed to be all about anyway? For me, you asked personally, what was it that were some pivotal things in my life that kind of transitioned that? I'll point to a couple things. Recently, I did a podcast episode and I titled it something like, I built a successful church and was miserable,
Hmm.
right? God allowed me to learn from some amazing leaders in those larger church settings. And we were mentored and our team was coached in how to build a tremendous weekend worship experience. And I mean, we built on a smaller scale some of what you see in these larger churches. And I know I just said you shouldn't do that, but now I'm telling you why. We did everything we were told we were supposed to do, and it worked. Like, we had a phenomenal weekend worship service, great music, pretty good preaching, if I do say so myself, a broadcast that was going out at a really high quality level for a rural church to be producing.
Yeah.
And I came to the end of all of that, Les, and I realized something is not working. It on the outside, it looks like it's healthy and it looks good, but I knew in my heart, this isn't working. This is not efficient. This is not what I read about in the New Testament. And it's really so here's another thing that was a pivotal thing for me. I read a book from Francis Chan called Letters to the Church.
Hmm.
And I may not be getting it word for word, but he asks a question in that book that just haunted me. It wrecked me. The question was essentially, if all we had to build our church upon was the New Testament, and we didn't have any of the other things we've known to be church, would our churches be built to look anything like what we have built? And that is a haunting question to wrestle with when your sole paycheck comes from leading that church. And because this is what we've built. Now, again, I want to be really clear. I'm not, it wasn't a matter of feeling like I was doing something wrong or immoral or something like that. It was just coming to terms with, I think we need to be doing something different. And then how do I support my family if my paycheck goes away from this? And that plus that's the negative side. The positive side is I saw God opening up some avenues for me to continue in ministry, but to do it differently than what I had been doing. And so for me, I recognize that the season of my leadership at that senior leadership level was coming to a close. And so I have been on a journey in recent years of what what am I now? Am I still a pastor? What's my identity if I'm not, don't hold that title in that office? And am I still in ministry? And is it okay for me to be making more money now than I ever have been in my life? And is that okay? Like, I'm on that journey, and I would love to help other pastors walk a similar journey, because I think there's a lot of pastors who feel stuck. To what you were saying, Les, they feel trapped and they don't know how to get out. And the only way out that they see, sadly, many times, is crashing and burning. And I
Yeah.
don't want that for pastors. I think if we can help pastors see that there is a healthy transition available to them, that
Mhm.
that we can help throttle them into one of the most effective seasons of ministry in their life, and that ultimately the church will be better for it. I'm not necessarily saying your church will be better for it in terms of the group that gathers inside of a building and sits in pews and faces forward. Like, I think that institution is getting ready to be rocked. It already has started with the COVID pandemic and all of this, but I think that model is becoming less and less effective. And I think that God is stirring the hearts of some leaders to lead into a new era of ministry. And I think it's going to look radically different than what you and I have known the church to be for many years. That's my prayer. That's my vision for the church.
Yeah, and don't you think that this last year, among a lot of other things, has opened up the eyes of a lot of people of what is possible? Because there is another way. You don't have to choose
Yes.
between being faithful to your calling, as a shepherd or a minister of the gospel. You don't have to jettison that. You have to decide between that or um, being employed at a local church level, even necessarily.
Yeah.
So as you know, we've had this conversation offline as well. This is kind of an overflow of you and I sharing our hearts, but man, I just couldn't agree more with that. And I want there to be another option besides someone feeling that they've got to put themselves and often their family under just being taking a beating really from week to
Yep.
week in order to be faithful to their calling.
Yes. Les, there's not just another option. There is a plethora of options. I never thought I'd use that word on a podcast. There are so
There it is.
many options available to these pastors if we can help them think creatively, think a little bit outside the box, and really just redefine ministry. What is ministry? Is it possible to be obedient to my God-given calling, but to do it maybe outside the four walls of a church building, or in addition to doing it
Mhm.
within the four walls of a church building? Here's my thing, Les. My goal isn't to get a whole bunch of pastors to quit ministry. My goal is to get a whole bunch of pastors to really get clarity on what is the ministry they've been called to, and what if there's many different ways that that can be carried out, and
Yes.
what if we have accepted a lot of narratives and assumptions and limiting beliefs about what it means to be the church and what it means to lead the church and be a pastor. Like, I just think that it's time that we question some of this, and it's a healthy thing. I recognize that religious people get a little nervous when some radical figure starts saying, "Hey, let's question the core of your institution." But I think I just came to this epiphany the other day, talking in a coaching conversation with another pastor. We kind of uncovered this together. When Jesus stepped on the scene of human history, over 2,000 years ago, who was his greatest group of opposition? It was the religious establishment, right? Because
Right.
here he comes along, not giving any honor to the institution and the structure that they had taken this simple message of God and turned it into this big old religious nightmare. And Jesus wasn't impressed about that at all. His message was a huge threat to the thing they had built, and he didn't care about that. He invited people to follow him out of that into this new thing called the church. I think we're kind of in a similar season of revolution right now, where Jesus is once again leading people to follow him out of a religious institutional structure that he never asked us to build. We built it. We've put so much emphasis on it, and it's killing us. And
Yeah.
so he's like, "Hey, follow me. This was never supposed to be this complicated, this difficult. And no one said you had to starve while you were doing it, by the way. So let's
Mm.
get you set up in life where you're thriving in life financially and in so many other ways. And out of that abundance and that overflow, be my sheep and feed my sheep and follow me." And it is about the gospel. So I know when maybe a traditional pastor hears me speak, this may come off a little abrasive, because it's like, it sounds like he's kind of questioning everything I'm doing. Guys, I've been there, done that, have the t-shirt. I'm not opposed to what you're doing. I'm just more and more convinced that that model is becoming less effective. And as I look into the future, I don't see it serving us well. I see it taking us out by the thousands every
Mm.
month. So if you can't tell, Les, I get kind of wound up about this.
Well, and for good reason. Remember, in the Revelation, when Jesus is standing at the door and knocking, behold, I stand at the door and knock. He's not knocking on the doors of the human heart.
Yeah.
He's knocking on the doors of the church.
Yeah. Amen.
Let me in.
Yep.
And the guys that are on the front lines, they know that what you're saying right now rings true. It
Yep.
may not be what we all want to hear, but it's what we all need to hear. And not every place is the same. Not every ministry is the same, but it doesn't take a lot of perception and discernment to see that, man, our world, the foundations have already been shaken.
Yes.
We're still getting some. So I don't even know if they're aftershocks. I think it's the real shocks. It's what's going on right now. But we
Yeah.
have an opportunity. We may not be able to control or impact that as it happens, but we can impact what our response is going to be as it
Yeah.
happens. We can have something to do with that.
You mentioned this COVID thing earlier, and just the disruption that brought to the church. I think in some ways I'm excited about that, but it exposed some things. It showed us that
Mhm.
again, the model that we have come to call church and are we're very comfortable with didn't really even stand up that well under a pandemic where, statistically speaking, not even that many people died. And I don't mean that callously. I'm just saying, from a pandemic of what we were being told it was and preparing for, like, our church model didn't stand up very effectively under that. Like,
Yeah.
almost immediately churches were scrambling, going, well, how do we function as the church, because the way we've always done it, that was taken off the table. And so
Mhm.
again, and it showed what's possible. I think at least it tipped the hat to, you know what, we can still be the church with some of the normal structure being removed or taken away. We can still do it. So what if, moving forward, what if we leaned into that disruption? And what if we leaned into all that is now possible when we kind of take our mindset away from, well, church has to be this way. We've always done it this way. Well, what if it didn't have to be that way? And what if we
Right.
found some ways that were much more sustainable and life-giving and simple? I'm there, man. And I love what I get to do right now. I have powerful conversations with pastors almost every single day, walking beside them in that journey. And by the way, Les, I would want any pastor listening to this to know, if you feel isolated and alone and overwhelmed, like with all this, you don't have to be. There are resources out there, just like Les, just like John, that would be more than happy to walk beside you through
That's
this
right.
journey and serve you powerfully as you transition into a new and more effective season of ministry.
100%. 100%. Well, we probably need to start at least getting to the off ramp here. I know your time is in demand as well. So as we do that, what are some things that some action steps or calls to action that you can give our listeners first, if they would like to have a conversation like that or see some tools and resources that would encourage them, where can they go and how can they engage you if they want to find out more?
Yeah, well, if someone wants to connect more with me and my message, my website, I'm online at smalltownbigchurch.com. And that's also the name of my podcast. And you can subscribe through my website. Also, through my website, I offer a 60-minute complimentary coaching conversation. So if there's a pastor listening to this going, John, I'd like to talk more intimately with you about my situation where I'm at, I would welcome that. So you can find that through my website as well. And I'm on Facebook and YouTube as well. So any way that I can serve your audience that way, Les, I would be more than happy to do that. And I would just, as far as an action step, I would just challenge a pastor. This would be my biggest takeaway right now, just a simple thing. I would love to ask your pastors to do a little self assessment right now in this moment. Just check in. What are you feeling right now? What's the energy in your heart? Do you find yourself, your heart race, your heart is increased a little bit. You're just excited about what you're hearing, or maybe you're getting angry. Maybe there's some anger boiling up inside as you hear me share this, or maybe it's fear, but just check in. And what am I
Mhm.
feeling right now? Like, I want to help you process this. If you totally disagree with me, that's fine, but then make the case for why things don't need to be overhauled and changed. Like, lean into that. But I'm here to serve those pastors that would resonate with that message, saying, John, I recognize things do need to change. The model is broken, and I want to be a part of that change. Les, I have a vision to see 10,000 churches transformed, to get to be a part of that transformation through serving their leaders. And if don't ask me how I'm going to accomplish that, I don't know. I just know that I'm believing that God wants to use my life to make an impact in the lives of many, many churches. So if I'm speaking to a leader saying, John, my church needs that, let's talk. I'm here to serve
Mhm.
you. So,
That's right. Well, healthy churches are led by healthy leaders.
yeah.
And we're all in some ways cracked vessels, and God can use it. We have this treasure in earthen vessels, but man, it'll catch up to you. And that's not good. Now's the time. The thing about the way the pandemic was manifested in our organizations, whether it be small businesses or institutions like families and governments and institutions such as the church. there was a there was kind of a slow bleed that I think a lot of church leaders noticed over the last couple of decades. Yet it's really hard to put their finger on what's going on or how can we stop that and kind of turn it around. And if we're mixing metaphors a little bit, but if you followed that frog in the kettle kind of metaphor, if that was a slow increasing, kind of getting it to boiling point, the pandemic took the knob and cranked that fire all the way up quickly.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it was happening already, but in many ways, as far as from a leadership perspective, you know, if we'll listen, this can teach us a great deal and hopefully save us a lot of time and pain in the process, and a lot of lives that would have been lost between now and the time that we woke up. So maybe this can wake us up in a really good way.
100% agree, Les. I'm grateful for what COVID did for the church. Again, I know there was a lot of pain in the disruption that it caused, but I think it was that jarring thing we needed to wake some spiritual leaders up out of their slumber. Because if not, we'd have just continued on that slow bleed, just
Mhm.
believing that, well, we'll figure this out at some point, or this is how we've always done it, so we'll just keep doing it. I think this exposed some real issues and put it on a fast track, both for good and bad. But
Yeah,
again, I look at it more with the opportunity, the potential that's coming
absolutely.
out of this, and the truth being the best days of the church are still in front of us. Jesus Christ is not in despair about his
No
church.
way.
He's
No
waking his
way.
church up and he's moving. And
Mhm.
so I'm thrilled to get to be a part of that conversation and looking for other leaders that want to join us in that journey of doing a new thing. So I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Well, I think some of the best news of all, maybe the best news of all through all of this has been that all of the ways that human beings address problems in the world have also been exposed as futile, whether it be education or government or just throwing money at things. When somebody's lying there in a hospital bed fighting for their lives, none of those things eh, give that person what they need the most.
Yeah.
And what that person needs the most is the assurance of, if this is it, and if they're slipping out into eternity and they're getting ready to meet God, we've got the answer to that. We've
Yeah.
got the only thing that can provide hope in that kind of what would be hopelessness. And
Man.
that's the best news of all. And I'm excited for the opportunities that we have in the church to reach out to others in our community and to be genuine and authentic in the way that we reach out with the gospel and with meeting the needs that those people have, because there's really nobody else that has that answer. We do.
Amen. Good stuff.
Yeah. John, thank you, man, for coming on and spending the last little while with us. I know that our listeners are going to probably, this is going to be an episode they're going to listen to several times probably. I've taken a lot of notes just as you've been talking as well, and I look forward to having more conversations with you too. So thanks a lot for joining us, man.
Man, you're so welcome. The time went way too fast, so let's do this again sometime. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Sounds good.